Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Talk Gnosis. This evening we're going to be discussing our Gospel of Thomas, verse 22, continuing our ongoing discussion on the Gospel of Thomas. Good evening, Bishop Peterson. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, why don't we get right into this? Did you have a verse for our viewers, for those who may not be familiar with the Gospel of 22?
Yes, I am going to actually read Bentley Layton's translation because I really like Bentley Layton's translation. So here we
Very
go.
good.
Jesus saw some little ones nursing. He said to his
Mhm.
disciples, these little ones who are nursing excuse me, I'm sorry. These little ones who are nursing resemble is those who enter the kingdom. They said to him, so shall we enter the kingdom by being little ones? Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and that you might make the male and the female be one and the same, so that the male might not be male, nor the female be female. When you make the eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom. That is a tongue twister.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a little bit.
But it starts out reasonable enough.
Hmm.
You know, it starts out, he saw some little ones nursing, and he said, these little ones who are nursing resemble those who shall enter the kingdom.
Hmm.
And we're used to that sort of thing. I mean, we see that in the canonical Gospels. You must become as a little child to enter the kingdom. Um, but then they ask him, so are we going to become, do we have to become like kids to enter the kingdom? And then he gets a little funky. And yeah, he's going on about making the two one and making the inside like the outside, inside and outside, and the men can't be like men, women can't be like women. And if you make eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, it's
Hmm.
almost like everything's collapsing on itself.
Yeah, I see a lot of different imagery in this. I mean, again, like most of these verses that are a little long and complicated, I like to break it into segments. Um, Obviously, I think the first part we see, as you pointed out, in the Gospels. I mean, we see references to children in Mark and Luke. I mean, throughout the Gospels. Um, Part of that for me, my personal interpretations, not necessarily anybody else's, but I think it feels a little bit like when we were discussing on our Christmas special, as far as the innocence of children. The little ones who are nursing resemble as those who enter the kingdom. Um, and the reason I say that is that most of our behavior is learned behavior. I mean, we can say that most of our bad behavior, good behavior, bad behavior, is learned and picked up from somewhere. But as children, we are innocent. We do not know hatred. We don't know prejudice. We don't, we're not homophobic. We don't have any of these bad qualities that sometimes embrace mankind. As children, no, you put a bunch of little toddlers together, they don't care if they're brown, yellow, green. They're
Yeah.
all going to get together and play. But as adults, that same group may not get along. So, to me, part of that I think is one, kind of the innocence of children there. But like you said, and they kind of ask him a direct question. Well, does this mean that we've got to be like the little ones? And then he starts getting into this. You've got to make the two into one. You've got to make the inside like the outside. You've got to make the above like the below. You've got to make the male and the female be one. And then it starts sounding very much like some of the stuff we hear in later Hermetic material, even some of it very alchemical kind of a nature. We start going down, then to the end, where it's almost as if a substitution. When you make an eye in place of an eye, when you make a hand in place of a hand, when you make a foot in place of a foot. Yeah, that starts getting pretty deep and heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that as well. And again, my image is something just kind of collapsing in on itself.
Mm-hmm.
That was that image that I had in my head. Now, for me, when I read the bit about the entering the kingdom of heaven, I think that that's interesting because, of course, Jesus repeats this sort of thing frequently in the
Mm-hmm.
canonical gospel. You have to receive the kingdom of heaven like a little child. This is how unless you make yourself like a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, first of all, I think one key word for me is enter. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say, necessarily what you are going to be once you are in the kingdom of heaven. And as we have noticed when we've been doing these Gospel of Thomas studies, there frequently the disciples are the people who are listening are being encouraged to be like adults, to grow
Mm-hmm.
up, to stand. But it's clear that the entry point to the kingdom of heaven is being like a child.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as you point out, stripping oneself of prejudices, things that some Gurdjieffians might call false personality,
Mm-hmm.
stripping yourself of that. The other thing I think is interesting is, of course, they're nursing at the breast. They are taking in a very digestible form of food. And we
Mm-hmm.
know in St. Paul's writings, he talked about when he initially started working with his churches, he would nurture them on the milk of the gospel, but would
Mm-hmm.
eventually he could eventually start giving them strong meat.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense of immaturity here that we start with. And that's the key to entering. Now, when we look at this kind of this this business with the male not being male, the female not being male, things being collapsed on themselves. If you think about an infant, do very small infants express gender? They really don't that much. I mean,
Right.
some of there's certainly some that look more masculine and feminine, but really they're poop machines. And they whine and they cry a lot, and that's the sort of thing that happens. I don't know how, I'm not an expert on neonatal anatomy and physiology, but they don't have a lot of control over their hands. I mean, they're born genetically with a hand being right-handed or left-handed, but at that point, it doesn't really much matter. They don't have control over their legs. They're still learning how to focus their eyes. There's a
Mm-hmm.
sense in which that baby is all kind of one. There isn't this kind of dualism that
Mm-hmm.
happens even when we look at the right and left sides of our bodies, the way our eyes work, the way our senses operate. The baby's just kind of one big mush at that point. And eventually it's being nurtured, then it can move on to maturity from there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's almost a sense in which we could say that, and when you enter in there into the kingdom, there needs to be a willingness to lose these hard-fought dualisms that we have in our physical bodies and in our senses. When we have an interior personality, an exterior personality, if we have we have an unconscious and a conscious. This is all going to have to collapse, and
Mm-hmm.
it's actually a very demanding passage if we think about it.
And I think the dualism idea that you're pointing out here definitely I think is reflective in the later parts of this passage as well. To me, it sort of points again either to, if we want to use a phrase, kind of a divine androgyny. It is getting rid of that dualism. When you make the two into one, make the inside like the outside. All of these things to me are that idea of getting rid of that duality, of getting rid of that illusion of separateness that divides us, and knowing that this is all but an illusion, this duality, this male female, inside outside, above below. So very, very interesting. I think that you kind of pointed out even the duality aspect, even within, I think the first verse when it refers to the part about, children and even nursing.
Yeah. So what is this going to look like for us? I mean, here's the thing. We struggle as individuals to develop. Childhood is hard. And infancy is hard. It's a struggle. It's frustrating for parent and child. Do we get to this point, and then all of a sudden, we're smacked with this particular teaching here. I've done all this. Now you're telling me I got to go back and do it all again? And how do you get there? How do we get back to that?
Mm-hmm.
Or possibly, how do we move forward to that?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this requires a very different kind of development.
Interesting. Yeah, again, I think there's lots of different, maybe even approaches and how we even get there. Some of the things that, again, we think of as children. Children later on, I mean, you can start becoming toddlers, and a little bit older, you can start seeing some of the behavior things that they've learned where, they kind of learn, okay, if I throw a temper tantrum, I can get this, I can get that. But I think that for the most part, infants and we're seeing suckling. So, when I'm thinking a suckling child, I'm thinking a child 1 year old or younger. Most kids are weaned, before that time, and not much after that period. So we're talking very small children who are, in my mind, I mean, they're devoid of shame. They're devoid of, like you pointed out, even kind of sexual awareness, or, a baby that age doesn't identify as being a male or a female. So is this part of our own process of escaping this duality of us kind of stripping ourselves back of that innocence, of getting rid of the ideas of shame and many of the things that kind of weigh down on us? I don't know.
Is it also a possibility that we are to be receptive?
Mm-hmm.
That to learn to be receptive to, for example, accept nourishment. That's what a baby is. I mean, a baby is primarily a receiver of care.
Mm-hmm.
And you start that way, and you receive the care, and this may be indicative is instead of asserting our maleness or our femaleness, instead of asserting asserting our various aspects of our personality, we choose to be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And not asserting, receiving. And at that point of receiving, we may receive that which can enable us to enter that kingdom. That can be hard for a lot of people. We've talked about this a bit with Bishop Mansfield.
Mm-hmm.
Was the difficulty sometimes in being a student of these teachings,
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to receive in a way that we can actually be nourished by it, and then move on to our own level of maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're constantly struggling with the assertion of ourselves, that may be something that our learning may be hampered.
I think those are some great and valid points you've just brought up.
Well, thank you, Bishop Gannimer.
Yeah, no. I think very, very, very good points there. I think it can definitely hinder ourselves, because again, I think what can happen is again kind of this assertion of our own personal ego, instead of as you've been explaining, just nourishment. I see in many ways. I mean. Almost some symbolism there with the idea of the fall and even the Garden of Eden, where at that point, man is being nourished by God, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Then when we start asserting our own will, I want this, I want that, and then we've got to sort of do things by, now we've got to go out and labor and do this, and things become hard and difficult. Where when we were just being nourished in paradise, things were perfected.
Yes, absolutely. There's that too, and there's even some stuff from Clement of Alexandria. He was speaking to Salome, and this is something that we have here from Stramata 3:13, 92 and 93. The Lord said to her, when you trample on the robe of shame, and remember that from the Garden of Eden, this idea that they were ashamed of their naked bodies, and when the two shall be one, and the male with the female, and then there is neither male nor female. In the first place, we have not got, okay, so in any case, that's what he's saying there. And there's this notion of neither the male nor the female trampling that robe of shame. We get into Second Clement, and he talks again, when the two shall be one, and the outside is the inside, and the male with the female, neither male nor female. So there's obviously some of this teaching is showing up in Clement as well. But there's an emphasis here on the male and the female, which I think will be kind of interesting when we get into our After Dark podcast with the Reverend Shauna Atterbury, who's a feminist theologian. And
should be interesting.
You'll have a good old time, and we'll gang up on you, Bishop Canterbury.
Oh, Lord. I'll have to I might have to pour a little whiskey in that coffee of mine.
I have to get Father Tony to come on in here and help you out. So we are going to have to wind up this show, but again, this is quite a passage. So I would love to hear from the audience. What did you think of this passage? Kindly go ahead and read it, because it's, as you notice, it's a very complicated passage. But please let us know in the comments, and let us know what you think of the passage and what kind of imagery showed up for you. I'd be curious to hear about that. We are, as I mentioned, going to be going on to record our Talk Gnosis After Dark podcast. This is a podcast, lasts about an hour, and we go more in depth into the topics that we go into in the video shows. And if you are a patron of our show, you can actually watch us as we tape this audio podcast. And if you are interested in being a patron of our show, you can visit Patreon, patreon.com/Gnostic. Pledge a small amount per video or podcast, and every penny that you pledge directly supports the development of this program. And yes, you can set a monthly cap on how much you contribute each month. We don't want you getting a nasty surprise when you get your credit card statement, but we do appreciate your help. So also, we wanted to wish everybody a very happy New Year.
Happy New Year's, everyone.
And we hope it's a wonderful year for everybody. So thank you so much for your support this past year, and we're looking forward to giving you another great year of shows and guests and education. It's going to be great here on the Gnostic Wisdom Network. Yes, GnosticWisdom.net. You can check out all of the shows that have been put together by the Gnostic Wisdom Network, which is sponsored by the Apostolic Joanite Church. And finally, we want to ask for your feedback on the show, and you can certainly, as we said, make your comments under the video. You can visit us on Facebook, or you can send us an email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. So once again, Happy New Year to everybody. I hope everybody had a great holiday season, and thank you so much for your support, and have a great week. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
This has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. For more information about this and all of the Gnostic NYC Network's programming, visit GnosticNYC.com. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. This show has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License.